Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amity Overall-Lave, and I'm the Director of the National Ombudsman Resource Center. Welcome to our final webinar for the revised National Ombudsman Reporting System, or NORS, training series. Today, we'll review the Part 4 training materials on the NORS program, Ombudsman Program activities, specifically the activities in Part H of the Administration for Community Living, or ACL, NORS Table 3. Attendees today include State Ombudsman and representatives of the office. Representatives of the office of the State Ombudsman are often called local or regional ombudsmen, and they are our target audience today. Our other speakers today are going to be Louise Ryan, Ombudsman Program Specialist with the Administration on Aging, Administration for Community Living, and Maria Green, NORC Consultant. Attendees are muted. If you have questions, please submit those in the control panel on your screen. We will do our best to address as many questions as we can throughout the webinar. Next slide, please. Today's agenda includes a few remarks from ACL, a review of the Part 4 training materials, the Part 4 quiz, time for questions, and a reminder of the available resources on the NORC website. Just as a reminder for today's webinar and the entire series, we are focusing on the basics of NORS reporting. We updated our training materials to reflect the changes in the NORS data collection that are effective October 1. The purpose of these webinars is to review the new training materials and talk about the basics of reporting to improve reporting consistency. We are in the process of developing frequently asked questions for the revised NORS, and we will address those gray areas of reporting in the FAQs and in future training. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to welcome Louise Ryan, Ombudsman Program Specialist, Administration for Community Living, to share some comments from ACL. Louise.
Thank you, Amity, and welcome everybody. Could I have the next slide? So I just wanted to remind you all that, we are shifting to a new way of receiving your state's data, but that the fundamentals of NORS really are the same. So for instance, you still have cases and complaints, you still collect activity information, but we have made some modifications. So for instance, we've changed some language such as calling board and care facilities residential care communities, but that doesn't change what you call them in your state. If you call them assisted living or personal care homes, etc., you still call them by that name, and in the federal language of NORS, it's now residential care community. We're doing things like asking you to report additional data on your visits so that we get a better picture of, how much activity is related to visits and how important that work is. And then also, we want to get more data on the activities and services that you provide to residents and staff in residential care communities. So as you'll see in this upcoming webinar, there's activities now that you divide out by, was it to a nursing facility or a residential care community? And of course, most important with all of this is that you continue and do your best to maintain regular data entry and also to run routine reports to ensure ongoing data quality. As we've evolved with our both the NORS and our new reporting software, we're more reliant on that you use your local state software consistently and that you enter data routinely, because more and more we are relying on electronic transmission of that data rather than, as we currently have, manual entry that is not at all connected to your state software. So I really want to emphasize the importance of data entry and also remind you that we do not collect any personally identifiable information. We are still just collecting numbers, but we are collecting, again, more of the detail on your cases, complaints, and activities. Just as next slide, please. So, and as a reminder, the data that you collect and report on at the local level that gets rolled up to the federal level is used by ACL and AOA to describe and promote the Ombudsman program. So, we use it in various ways to justify the budget, to share the stories and the experiences of residents, and also, making all that data available to the public. So the public website is called AGID, and you can find all of the NORS data there. And so we are also doing things like trying to find ways to tell the story and use the data in ways that kind of are in what we call data stories. So those are just some of the ways that we use the data. As you enter your data into your software, it's important that you don't overcount your activities, and we'll talk about that during today's training. And also, I know there's a lot that you do that we don't ask about, and NORS does not and never has captured all program activities. So we know there's great things you're doing. You might have wonderful websites or Facebook pages or other social media activities, for instance, but we are just not collecting that level of detail. Now at the state level, your state ombudsman may choose to collect additional state level data that is, of course, very helpful to your program at the state level. Next slide. So just as a reminder, all of these webinars are recorded and all the training materials are available on the NORC site. And I strongly encourage you to use these materials for your own use and to train other representatives of the office in your state. This is, we've designed this to apply to everybody, and really encourage you to not recreate the wheel, but use what's out there, and keep using it and getting familiar with these training materials. There will be more NORS training in the future. We will have the NORS, as Amity mentioned, the NORS FAQs and a follow-up webinar. The Resource Center is going to develop some on-demand NORS training. And then also we will be providing in-depth technical assistance and training for state ombudsmen on a section of NORS that really they need to report on, and we want to give them better guidance there. And with that, I will turn it over to Amity.
Thanks, Louise. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, nope, you've already got it, Katie. Thank you. So these are the 3 training documents for Part 4. Similar to the other parts, we have the basic principles, the quiz, and the quiz answers. You'll also need the NORS Table 3 for today's webinar. But before we talk about what the materials have in them, I do want to apologize. We sent materials last week in hopes that you would review the quiz and answer the quiz questions before today's webinar. However, after sending them, we realized there were some errors. So I sincerely apologize for any confusion and certainly the inconvenience. I'd like to say that I put those errors there on purpose to see if folks were paying attention, but nope, they were just errors, so I apologize. Please use the materials that are attached as handouts in your toolbox, and they are available on the NORC website. Those are the ones that we've corrected those mistakes. So thank you for your understanding. So as I mentioned, each person taking the quiz needs to have the NORS Table 3 State Program Information, specifically Part H, as a reference for the definitions of terms, codes and values, and examples and reporting tips. As mentioned on the quiz document, this quiz covers sections S551 through S68. So if questions arise during the quiz, then definitely refer back to that section. Some of the answers in the quiz will be really easy and obvious to code when entering data into your software system, or at least we hope they will be. They were included in the quiz to introduce some of the reporting data elements that are being collected in this version of NORS. So just to give you an example of what's a little different, even though it may not be difficult. So as Louise mentioned, the NORS Table 3 contains a lot of information that really only the Office of the State Ombudsman will complete and provide with the NORS annual data submission to ACL. So just to let you know, the information that we will not cover today includes the complaint examples, systems issues, Ombudsman program organizational structure, staffing and volunteer data, conflict of interest issues, budgeting, facility data elements, and state and local coordination activities. So that information will be covered at another time, specifically with staff of the Office of the State Ombudsman. Next slide, please. And as a reminder, just like Louise said, most of the data elements for the state program information in the table is written by the state ombudsman, and that is included on the basic principles document just as a reminder. So we're hoping that when you use these materials to train either your local staff representatives or volunteers, that'll just be a helpful reminder to you. And we're only focusing on those reporting activities that are applicable to your work. Next slide. And as this is also in the basic principles document, that NORS does not capture all the wonderful things that you do. However, states will need to determine how to document all of your activities and ensure that there's not duplication in reporting in NORS. Next slide. So getting into the basic principles, this part actually, just so you know, I wanted to review it just so you have this information and we touch on it, but this is not covered in the quiz. The state ombudsman will report the following data elements about training for representatives of the office. The 3 parts: certification training hours, which are the total hours that's required for an individual, either paid or volunteer, to achieve certification, which then allows them to be eligible for designation as a representative of the office. And then the second element would be continuing education hours. Annually, the state must report the annual number of hours required, whether you call them maybe continuing education hours or in-service hours, that are required for all representatives of the office to maintain their certification and designation. And the third piece would be individuals, the number of individuals completing the certification training. So this number, states are required to report the total number of individuals, paid or volunteer, that complete the certification training within that federal fiscal year of reporting. So that doesn't mean that they are all designated to be representatives, but they want the number of people that completed the required training. Next slide. Thank you. So additional information about reporting training. This is training for facility staff that's provided by the Ombudsman program. Programs for NORS are required to report the number of sessions, training sessions that were conducted, and the type of facility. So whether it was a nursing facility or a residential care community. And you would decide that based on the facility affiliation of most of the participants, because it could be that you're maybe presenting at a conference for providers and there's a mix of representatives from both of those settings, but you would go with the majority of the representatives in order to identify the type of facility. For in-person training, you would report each training instance as a separate session, even, and this is important for all of you that are out in the field, even if you repeat the same training at the same facility, such as in different shifts. You're often trying to catch all the staff, which is hard due to shift work. And so, as you know, sometimes you'll provide the same training just twice, depending on the shift at the same facility on the same day. So, for example, the program provided an abuse prevention training to the morning and evening shift at a nursing home, and that would equal 2 sessions. Next slide, please. So this is a little unique and I think some helpful additional guidance in how to report distance learning. And when we say distance learning, we're talking about webinars, conference calls, an on-demand course. So basically anything where the trainees are learning from a distance and it's not in person. We know that a lot of programs are having to turn to this, whether it's for facilities and their staff or even or representatives of the office. But to report distance learning, such as those webinars, conference calls, or on-demand courses, as a session in NORS, there has to be a way to track that participants completed the training and be able to identify their facility affiliation, meaning that a state needs to be able to verify that at least one person attended and completed the distance learning in order to report it as a training session. Also important to note, regardless of the number of attendees, a distance learning training program that tracks completion numbers and facility affiliation counts as only one session. If an ombudsman program offers distance learning on a variety of topics, each training topic with at least one person completing it counts as one session. So for example, if you have 2 online training programs on resident rights, and one is focused on resident rights in the nursing facility setting, and the other is for residential care communities, the content of each is specific to that facility type. So therefore, the state would report that as 2 sessions in NORS, one under each facility type, assuming that at least they can prove that one person completed each of those training programs. Next slide. So something else in the basic principles and in the Part 4 revised NORS that's important to cover, of course, is facility visits. So there are 3 parts that states are required to report for data elements related to facility visits for each facility type. They're supposed to report the number of facilities visited in general, so all the number of facilities that were visited regardless of the purpose of the visit, whether it was a complaint visit or non-complaint visit. The definition for that is the total number of nursing facilities and residential care community facilities that received at least one visit by a representative of the office during the reporting year, regardless of the purpose of the visit. And this one change is going to be extremely helpful to really get a feel for access that residents are having to the Ombudsman program across the country. So that's going to be a really helpful number to collect. The second would be the total number of all visits. So again, the total number of nursing facility and residential care community facility visits, no matter the purpose of the visit, by representatives of the office. And then the third would be the number of facilities that had routine access. And just as a reminder of what routine access is the total number of nursing facilities and residential care communities that were visited not in response to a complaint in all 4 quarters by representatives of the office. So you may remember that the current NORS, that is the number that's pulled out and reported on, and so it doesn't reflect all of the visits that are happening across the country. So it's going to be really helpful to have this more specific data collection for facility visits to get a better feel for the significant impact that you're making in people's lives. Next slide, please. So basic principles for survey participation. States are required to report each distinct type of survey activity as one instance, and again by facility type. So you'd report the total number of instances of survey activity by representatives of the office. That means that, for example, that participation includes participation in both the standard surveys as well as the complaint surveys. And it includes but isn't limited to providing pre-survey information to surveyors, sharing complaint summary reports, participation in exit conferences, and IDRs, the informal dispute resolution. So as you can see, it's really looking at any kind of interaction during the survey process with representatives, by representatives of the office. And also important to note that you can have more than one survey participation activity associated with only one survey in one facility. So for example, we mean that a surveyor calls you prior to them entering the building. So you provide information about your observations during your visits and the type of complaints you've handled during that phone call. And then you also go out to the facility and attend the exit survey. So that would be 2 instances of survey participation within that one survey in that one facility. Next slide, please. So for resident council and family council participation, somewhat similar to what we just talked about with survey participation, you are to report each distinct type of resident or family council participation as one instance by facility type. Participation includes meeting with council leadership, training the council, and attending a council meeting. So just some tips and reminders, and these are in the basic principle documents. If you are providing technical support or consultation or resource information to a resident council or family council outside of a council meeting, you would report that as that activity is providing information and assistance. So if you're just meeting one-on-one to provide some information, that would be providing I&A. If 2 ombudsmen attend the same resident or family council meeting, that participation should only be reported as one instance. So even though there were 2 ombudsmen there, you were attending just one meeting. So states will need to discuss and train on how to document that in their system to avoid overcounting. So for example, maybe one ombudsman, if there are 2 that attended that meeting, one ombudsman could count it as attendance at the resident council, and the other ombudsman that attended would count it as a facility visit. So therefore, you're not saying that you attended a resident council meeting twice just because there were 2 people there. Next slide, please. So for community education, and this touches a little bit upon what Louise mentioned earlier about NORS not counting everything, including like social media activity. For community education, states need to report each instance of community education outreach sessions by ombudsman. You would use community education and report that as a session for attending a health fair and having a booth to promote the program and information about long-term care, other community events that are similar to that, and general presentations to the public about the Ombudsman program, your role, long-term care, etc. NORS, for the purpose of NORS, the number of individuals attending the community education event is not collected. It may be collected in your state, and that's fine, but that's not something that's collected by NORS. If a community education session is provided by distance learning, you need to go back to those requirements that we mentioned earlier about training, and there needs to be a way to track that participants completed the session in order to report it as a community session in NORS. And newsletters, producing and sharing a newsletter, writing and posting a blog, or other forms of media such as social media interaction, speaking with the media, those don't count as community education. And another tip, if 2 ombudsmen participate in the same community education event, again, similar to the resident family council meetings, it counts as one instance. So with that kind of high-level overview of basic principles, I want to turn it over to Maria, and she'll talk a little bit about how we're going to take the quiz and then go right into the quiz questions.
Hi, everyone. So if you haven't done so already, if you will get in front of you maybe a copy of your NORS Table 3. Katie, if you'll go to the next slide, please. You can see what that looks like. Yeah, so if you want to have handy your NORS Table 3, you can use that as a reference to look at the examples and tips, and that will help you with the quiz questions. And this quiz is going to cover sections S51 through S68. Next slide. So the first codes that we're going to talk about, S51 through S52, are regarding training for facility staff. And so on the screen, what you see now is an example. So we won't do a poll question on this one, it's an example. You conduct an in-service training at a nursing facility in your area. To make the training available to all staff, you present the training at 2 different times during the day. So the audience is going to be the nursing facility staff and you're going to document that there were 2 sessions. Report each training instance as a separate session, even if repeated at the same facility, just at different shifts, or when repeated even at a conference. You provided 2 training sessions with the staff attendance split between 2 sessions on the same day. Okay, so for the next one, it is our scenario 2. You conduct a training for staff in a residential care community. Another residential care community requests the same training program, and you conduct the session for that community. The audience is your residential care community staff. So the poll question is, how many sessions do you record? If you'll take the poll now. Excellent. So we see that 89% of you responded that it would be recorded as 2 sessions, and that is correct. You conduct the training at 2 different facilities, and this counts as 2 sessions, even though the content was the same. So the next one is scenario 3. Your local ombudsman program developed a web-based, on-demand training on residents' rights for facility staff that tracks information for each person who completes the course. When you review the information report regarding the course, you see that some of the training was viewed by 100 people. But by the end of the year, 50 people actually completed the entire course. More than half of the individuals who completed the course were nursing facility staff. So the audience is going to be nursing home facility staff. The poll question is, how many sessions would you report? So if you'll conduct the poll, Katie. Okay. So the correct answer is reported by 72% of you as 1 session. So we know that we decided the type of facility because we went based on the majority of the people who responded, which was nursing home staff. If an ombudsman program has a web-based, online, or on-demand training session, the program needs a way to determine if anyone completes the course and their facility type to be able to report it in NORS. If a course is available but no one completes it, that course cannot be reported as a training session in the NORS report. The number of individuals completing the course is not reported in NORS. If your state chooses to collect additional data about the number of attendees or audience members, then that's guidance that your state ombudsman program office would provide to you. Scenario number 4. Your local ombudsman program creates an abuse reporting training and offers it as a web-based training on the program's website. No registration is required. You can see a report of the number of times the abuse reporting training page is viewed, but no other user data is available. And in this scenario, your audience is unknown. So the poll question is, how many sessions? Yeah, 71% reported 0 sessions, and that is correct. Posting training information without a method to determine if anyone completes the course and the type of facility that the trainees represent does not count as a training in NORS, because there's no way to determine if anyone actually received the training. So that's something to consider if you and your program either want to develop online training or have it currently. You may want to look at how that is being recorded. So the next slide. Oh, let me stop here and check in with Amity. Amity, are there any questions before we discuss information and assistance?
Yes, sorry, Maria, I was responding to a question. I do want to go back a little bit to a question about visits, and maybe Louise can speak to this, but I will answer it first, and then Louise, feel free to add more. But the question was, does a visit count as routine if I don't speak with any residents? And my answer to that would be no. The entire purpose of providing routine access to the program is providing residents with access to the Ombudsman program. So if you're out in the facility and you're not actually speaking with the residents, then I would not count that as a routine visit. But Louise, feel free to add if you feel otherwise.
I would agree with that, Amity. And what we're trying to do is get a better sense of how often eyes and ears are in the buildings, in the facilities by the Ombudsman program. So when we ask about routine visits, we're not asking about specifically the number of routine visits. We're asking that, like we ask now, how many buildings, how many facilities got a quarterly visit, not in response to a complaint, which we would call, a routine visit. And typically states have some kind of guidance about what is involved in a routine visit. So running in and dropping off brochures would not be a routine visit. You are eyes and ears in the facility, but it's not a routine visit. So we still want to collect, how often do facilities get more of a attentive quarterly visit. And then we also want to capture all the other visits you make. So again, this will be important that you rely on your software to do the math for you to figure out, which are the quarterly visits, how many total visits, etc. So, and we will provide more guidance on this as well. I also just wanted to address one other thing around visits. There's a question about any plans to give a sample checklist or what would be required of what's routine. We can talk about that further at the Ombudsman Resource Center, maybe get some feedback from NASOP, the State Ombudsman Association, and the Local Ombudsman Association. But I think, a lot of states have processes in place, and so it's also good for state ombudsmen to talk to each other about what they're doing and what makes sense for your state. The only looks like a lot of questions popping up around visits. We could probably do a whole session just on visits, so some of these will have to get back to you on the FAQs. But I saw another comment that I wanted to clarify, not about visits, but about community education. And there was a comment that says, so you mean our newsletter won't count as community education? And that is correct. A newsletter does not count as community education, and that has always been the case. So if you're reporting, you might be reporting at the state level that you did a newsletter as community education, but that should not be reported in NORS as a community education activity. And if you look at the current NORS definition, it gives examples of, for instance, attending health fairs or providing other outreach activities or information sessions, not a newsletter. And that's if you look back at the current training and the current NORS definition. So that has not changed. And I do think some states overcount community education because they're counting things that should not be counted. So we still have one more, so we have this year, and then starting next year in the new NORS, I want to be really clear. It's important that you do those things, but at the federal level, we just don't need that level of detail. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, and we appreciate it, but it's not a level of detail that we need. So please do not count newsletter articles, Facebook postings, other social media activities as community education. And I'll turn it back to Amity.
Thanks, Louise. And Maria, I'll turn it back to you in just a second, but I want to reiterate because we've had some questions come in about the materials. And again, I do appreciate your grace that we made a mistake. That happens. But the materials that are correct, where those errors were corrected, are in the toolbox right now. So you can download those, and those are the correct ones. Or you could go to our webpage, and I'll post the link to that. And it's also available at the end of the webinar. And those are the ones that were posted with the corrections. So just wanted to let you know, sorry for the inconvenience if you already printed them, but thanks for your understanding. All right, Maria, back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we're gonna do quizzes and answers related to information and assistance. If you're looking at your table 3, I hope you are, it's codes S53 through S55. And so Amity, the next slide is scenario 5. Ms. Petra emails the Ombudsman Program asking for information regarding a nursing home care plan conference for her husband. You respond and attach information about how to prepare for a care plan conference. A couple of days later, she emails you with another request asking to learn what the current care plan says and how to get the home to include her ideas and a new plan. So you respond with detailed answers to her questions and include links to specific resources. So we know the facility type would be reported as a nursing facility. The poll question is how many information and assistance instances? Katie, if you'll administer the poll, please. Okay, yep, the 2 requests, which 72% of you said it would be 2 INA, count as 2 instances because they were received and responded to on different days. The data element S55 is intended to capture the number of instances when the Ombudsman provided that information and assistance. It is not, as we've mentioned before, a count of the number of individuals who received that INA. Next slide is scenario 6. Ms. Kathy Perez, the social worker at Peaceful Acres Assisted Living, calls you asking for a residents' rights poster and tips on how to keep residents informed of their rights. You share a few tips over the phone. That day, you mail the poster to the facility address, excuse me. Later, you remember a resource list of ideas related to keeping residents informed of their rights, and you send that resource also to Kathy. This counts as 1 information and assistance. So the poll question is, what type of facility is this? Other than it being very peaceful, apparently, in the name. Excellent. So 85% of you chose residential care community. That's correct. The name of the facility was Peaceful Acres Assisted Living. That would go under the classification of residential care community. If you were wondering too about the INA, your follow-up was an additional resource that was in response to the initial request. So it counts as 1 information and assistance. Sending the resource list was not in response to an additional request for INA. Okay. So before I move away from information and assistance, Amity, is there any questions that we need to address before we talk about ombudsman visits?
No, I don't. I see, kind of like Louise mentioned, a lot of questions about visits, but we'll address more of those in the FAQs and more when we get to this section of the quiz. I don't see any about information and assistance other than just for clarification. someone asked if it mattered if it was a nursing facility or residential care community in question number 5. So just as a reminder, for the sake of time for this webinar, we're only asking one of the 2 quiz questions for each scenario. So the other answer will be embedded in the slides. So
thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about ombudsman visits, and it's codes S57, S58, S60, and S61. I feel like we're calling bingo. Okay, for all of these scenarios, assume all visits in each scenario are to the same facility. Document all visits by the type of the facility, whether it's a nursing home or a residential care community. Visits may be associated with additional activities also documented as NORS codes, such as complaint investigation, information and assistance, resident council participation, or family council participation. This section of this quiz will focus on how to report the number of facility visits and whether the visit was complaint related. So the first one is an example. Scenario 7, you make 1 visit to a facility in response to 3 complaints. This would be recorded as 1 visit related to complaints. Scenario 8, you make 1 visit to a facility to visit residents to provide them with access to the Ombudsman program. This visit was not related to a complaint. How many visits would be recorded? If you'll administer the poll. Excellent. Look at that high number. 99% said 1 visit. That is right. Because you're counting your visit to the facility, you're not counting the number of residents that you visited with. And your visit was not in response to a complaint. Okay, so the next one is scenario 9. You visit a facility to follow up on a complaint. While you are there, you visit other residents and observe interactions between residents and staff that are not related to the complaint. Record as 1 visit to the facility. So the question is the visit complaint related? Okay, yeah, remember that your primary visit to the facility was complaint related. So the answer is yes, and 80% of you got yes. Okay, so scenario 10. You visit a facility because you know there is a new administrator and the facility is due for a routine visit. You speak with several residents and some staff members. And while speaking with a resident, she shares a complaint and asks for your assistance in addressing it with staff. This is recorded as 1 facility visit. Is the visit a complaint related to a complaint? No. And so 79% of you said no. So the key to this one is to remember that the primary purpose originally for the visit was just to provide routine access to residents and meet the new administrator. So while you were doing your routine visit is when somebody let you know of a concern that they had, and so that's why the answer is no, because you're remembering the original purpose of the visit, and it was routine. Okay, scenario 11. You and another ombudsman visit a facility together after a family member asks you to help resolve a problem with her mother's care. This is a complaint-related visit. How are you going to record the visit? That's right, 96%. You're recording it as 1 visit, even though 2 of you went, because You are going to address the one woman's complaint. Your state ombudsman may have additional guidance for you if in your state software program they want to collect additional information beyond what NORS wants to receive or capture. So they might have additional guidance for you, but what will get reported to NORS is one visit. Okay, scenario 12. You visit a facility to work on a complaint. Later that day, someone calls you with a different complaint on the same facility. Another ombudsman takes that complaint and makes a visit in the afternoon. This is recorded as a complaint-related visit. How should the visits be recorded? That's right, this counts as two visits because there were two residents with two separate complaints and two different ombudsmen visited the facility. Thanks, Katie. We'll go to 13. You stop at a facility and drop off residents' rights posters and brochures. And while you are there, you're invited to attend the Residents' Council meeting that afternoon. But you can't attend, but another ombudsman does go to the meeting. Remember, this is not a complaint-related visit. But how many visits would actually be documented? Katie will do the poll. There are two visits, and 59% of you chose the answer of two visits. Now, it's kind of close because I see that there was 41% said one visit, so let's talk about it. There are two visits because there are two ombudsmen going to the same facility at different times and for two different purposes. Although the first visit was very brief, its purpose was to promote access to the Ombudsman program, and it resulted in a request to attend the Resident Council meeting. Neither visit is complaint-related. The second visit would also be coded as a Resident Council participation activity, and that would either be S64 or S65, depending on whether it was a nursing home or an assisted living or a residential care community that you went to. Since that poll was so close, Amity, I wanted to check in and see if there were any particular questions about how that was recorded.
Yes, so yes, there are. So let me see. The questions were, I thought you said earlier just dropping off brochures was not a visit, so why is this counted as a visit? In scenario 13, Louise, you can speak to that too, but I assume that in this answer, again, the scenarios were just providing the information as simply as possible, that while you're there, they dropped off the materials, but also provided access to residents and spoke with residents during that visit, and that's why that's counted as a visit. And then the separate ombudsman that goes separately to the resident council meeting, that's why it's another visit. So the example Louise provided earlier, she said they just dropped off brochures and maybe spoke to the staff, not doing any of the other routine visit activities. Louise, is that what you?
Yeah, we were talking more specifically about kind of the routine visit, not in response to a complaint, where you're giving it more attention than dropping off some information. But, and just as a reminder, the routine visit, not in response to a complaint, is counting the number of facilities that got that routine visit, not in response to a complaint. So basically on that day, you had two visits, not in response to a complaint in that quarter. So you kind of have to look at it more holistically, that we're going to count the number of buildings that got a routine visit not in response to a complaint. If you look at that together, there were two activities or two aspects of that visit. So yes, there was the kind of dropping off information, which resulted in the invitation later that afternoon that someone else did. So it's still one facility, and likely there were other visits that quarter. If there are already two in one day, it's quite possible there were more visits. So again, I want to kind of stress to just make sure you document the visits, and if there's two people visiting together that only counts as one visit. We will have more FAQs on visits and just more guidance. But again, I think you all know we don't count enough of this activity. So this is a big shift, but I think it's a really important one.
Okay. Thank you both. Amity, if there's not anything else, I'll go to the next one so we make sure that we cover it.
Just one more thing, Maria, real quick, for just clarification. I want to focus on the fact, because we got a flurry of comments about clarifying scenario 13. The purpose of scenario 13, and we hear your feedback, so thank you for that, was to be really clear why that one example is different than the other examples that we gave earlier about two ombudsmen visiting one facility at the same time, and why you would count that as one visit. And so we were trying to set up a situation where it's very possible that two ombudsmen would visit the same facility the same day, but separate visits, and that's why it would count as two. So just wanted to provide that additional feedback, but we hear you, and thank you for that input.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk next about the participation in facility survey, resident council, and family council activities, and it's codes S62 through S67. So scenario 14, you share pre-survey information with the assisted living surveyors and participate in the exit conference. This facility type is residential care community. So the question is, how many survey activities should be documented? So 76% said 2 activities, and that is correct. Although both activities relate to one survey, it is reported as 2 activities. NORS instruction is to count the number of instances, not the number of residential care communities that had that survey activity. Therefore, it is permissible to have multiple survey activities associated with one residential care community.
Maria, if I could just interject for a minute.
Sure.
This is a departure from how it's currently supposed to work in NORS, where the current NORS asks basically how many facilities, how do I explain it? Basically, it's trying to get an unduplicated count currently in NORS, that you had specific survey activity. So if there were, say, 2 survey activities during the year, you only counted it twice, even if you had multiple pieces to that, like pre-survey information, exit conference, IDR. In the current NORS, that would only count as 1, which is very complicated. So really, we're just trying to simplify and reflect more the reality that you have multiple survey activities, and let's just count them all and not worry about what's in and what's out. So I hope that you'll find that easier, because basically it's just include everything. Thanks.
Okay, good. All right, so scenario 15. You participate in the exit conference for a survey at a nursing facility, and several weeks later, you participate in the informal dispute resolution regarding the same facility. The facility type is nursing facility. But how many survey activities would you report? All right, y'all did so good. 79% reported 2. I think that's because Louise gave you an extra tip there. And the NORS instruction is to count the number of instances, not the number of facilities that had the survey activity. Therefore, it is permissible to have multiple survey activities associated with one facility. Good. Okay, we'll go to scenario 16. The president of the resident council at Happy Acres Nursing Home asks you to join their meeting. Afterwards, the president asks you to provide training to their council leadership, and you do that a week later. So the facility type is a nursing facility. How many resident council activities would be reported? Oh my gosh, yes, you all rock. 94% of you said 2 activities. So you've got it. There's 2 activities because they occurred at different times and were for a totally different purpose. Okay, so we'll go to 17. A family council is beginning to develop at a residential care community, and one of the members invites you to their meeting as a resource and you attend. The next week, the newly elected president asks you to share resources to help the council's effectiveness. And you send the president some information, but then later that month, another resident council, family council asks you to speak at their meeting, and you do that also. So the facility type is residential care community. Our question is, how many family council activities have you done? Well, the answer is 2. We had 39% said 2. So let's look again at how the scenario, how it was written. There you go, Katie. Thank you. So one of the members invites you to their meeting as a resource and you attend. So that's the first one. The next week, the newly elected president asks you to share resources to help the council's effectiveness, and you send the president some information. That would be information and assistance. Later that month, a different facility council asks you to speak at their meeting, and you do so. That would be 2. So there are actually 2 family council activities, and then there would be the 1 information and assistance that you provided the resources to that particular council. Does that make sense? Or Amity, are there follow-up questions on that one?
This is Louise, and this is one where I want to remind you also to look at your examples and reporting tips in the Table 3 document because it directs you to use S55, which is information and assistance, to count technical support, consultations, and providing resource information that was offered for that type of information offered outside of the council meeting. So, you know, again, we don't want to overcount that level of participation. We want to accurately count it, and that's pretty much, that's no different than how it should be done now in NORS. So technically, it's really not a change.
Okay.
Thanks, Louise.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Maria. We received a question just about that, about, you know, why would it be information and assistance even when it's the resident council president? And as Louise said, it's outside of participating in the actual council meeting or training the council, or meeting even with, you know, council leadership, having an actual meeting. So yes, that would be recorded as INA. Good question.
Okay. So the next slide, we're going to make a shift to talk about community education sessions. If you've got your Table 3, this would be code S68 if you'd like to refer to it for the examples and the tips. So This is an example. You spend the morning staffing a booth during a health fair providing information about the Ombudsman program to 150 people. In the afternoon, you make a presentation on long-term care facilities and residents' rights at a senior center, and 50 people attend that event. So you had 2 different community education sessions were conducted, and this counts as 2 instances. The number of instances or activities is reported in NORS, not the number of individual contacts. So let's go to question number 19. You just finished an article on the Ombudsman program for the AAA for their newsletter, and you're going to post a few photos of the recent Ombudsman recognition ceremony on the Ombudsman program's Facebook account. And you tweet about it, and you attend a caregivers meeting. Boy, you're staying busy. You attend a caregivers meeting to share information about the Ombudsman program. So the AAA newsletter has a circulation of 1,000 addresses. You know it will take a few days to determine the reach of your social media posts. How many community education activities? Okay, 1 activity is the correct answer, 88%, and that 1 activity was the community education, the caregivers meeting that you went to. So remember, we all value and appreciate all the work that you do with your newsletters and your social media outreach. That's an important part of your work. But for the purposes of reporting to the Administration for Community Living, that information, a number of instances or a number of people who may have received it isn't recorded in NORS. Okay, we're going to go to scenario 20, and this is an example. The Ombudsman program has a web-based training program for consumers that tracks information about each person who completes the course throughout the year. When you review the information on attendees, there are 65 people who viewed part of the course and 30 who completed the entire course, including the quiz. This is documented as 1 community education activity. Okay. And now we can cover even any other questions, because we've gone through all of them. So this is any questions that you might have about any of the topics that we've discussed so far.
Thanks, Maria. And yes, we do have some I want to go back to. So one attendee said that they were instructed by their state that if they do 2 in-services in one day to accommodate staff, so different shifts, that it's only to be counted once. So I do want to go back to that and just say for the revised NORS that would be counted twice. So both the examples, and just so you know, the examples, the tips, the definitions, all the information in the NORC materials, the training materials, are based on the ACL tables. So please refer to both of those. So the example, the program provided an abuse prevention training to the morning and evening shift at a nursing home, so that equals 2 sessions. A second kind of similar example, the program provided morning and afternoon resident rights training at an assisted living provider conference over 2 days. So morning and afternoon for 2 days, so that counts as 4 sessions. So thanks for asking that question. I just wanted to clarify that. And let me keep scrolling. And yes, there are some other questions to address. If we could go back, Katie, to scenario 13, please. Thank you. And Louise, just you may want to respond to this one. The question was, because again, in this example, we were focusing on the fact about 2 separate ombudsmen visiting on the same day to the same facility. The question from the attendee was, what if it was the same ombudsman? So they, dropped off the brochures, did some routine visit activities, or not, and then dropped off brochures and then returned for the resident council, and maybe they did their routine visit activities in that visit. So would that count still as 2 entries if it was the same ombudsman visiting the same facility twice, or would it count as 1?
I think when we discussed this earlier, we decided it was still 2. Is that, and so I'm going from kind of some things we haven't quite hammered out yet, but that is what I believe we agreed on. It's still 2 visits.
Thank you. And let's see, other questions. If 2 ombudsman representatives attend 1 resident council meeting, is that 2? No, that would be 1. 2 representatives attending the same meeting, whether it's a resident council, family council, or even community education event, that would be 1 session. Good question.
I see there's questions about kind of, if you're doing a routine visit and you pick up complaints, that would still be considered a routine visit. Sometimes you might be going out on a complaint and you plan to add, say, an extra hour or 2 just to do a routine visit. One thing you want to think about is you want to show your routine visit work. So if you're doing both, a routine visit and you're following up on a complaint, it's okay to consider that a routine visit if you are, doing that extra work to, talk to a sampling of residents and follow up on other issues from previous visits and, look around and kind of do your observations. So, it can get a little muddy, I understand, but I think the point is, you want to, if you're doing a routine visit, call it that. You may be also following up on complaints, which is different than if you just are popping in to follow up on a complaint and then you leave, right? So sometimes you just have time to just do some quick visit with a resident to keep a complaint processing moving along. One other question somebody had was around, right now, some states don't count complaint-related visits like in a way that can be added up. They don't count it as a separate activity. They might enter it in their journal notes. And so that is something that your state ombudsman needs to work on, whether it's there in your software and you haven't been using it, so training on how to document in the activity those complaint visits, or ensuring that there's some way that those visits get summed up. So if you're not certain how you're going to do that in your state, that's important for you to talk to your state ombudsman about that.
Thanks, Louise. So another question I wanted to bring up, I had flagged earlier because I want to provide some clarification about this, and I can see why you asked, and I'm glad that a couple of questions came in. So when we mentioned earlier about just routine visits, providing access to the program, meaning that you interact with residents, the questions were, what if the facility's only a memory care unit for residents that perhaps can't communicate? So I want to be really clear that we didn't just mean literally speaking with residents, providing access and providing those observations like Louise mentioned, because obviously some of the settings you visit, the residents may not be able to communicate with you, but you still being there, observing things, speaking with residents when you can, observing how staff interact with the residents, and being there and being present to give access, that would still count as a visit. So I just wanted to be very clear that that's a great point to bring up. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, and that would also include getting information on resident representatives to follow up and call them if, so yeah, that certainly, yeah, we don't mean literally, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. And then another question that is somewhat similar, if you visit a facility that may be for individuals with developmental disabilities, and those residents aren't home during, your visit that's during the day because they're out on jobs or other sites and doing other activities, would that count as a regular visit? And no, if nobody's home at that home except for staff and you're not engaging with residents at all or observing residents at all or how staff interact with those residents, then no, you would just be visiting and maybe providing some information and assistance to the staff about your program and sharing some materials. But I would not see that as a visit because you did not, observe any residents or communicate with any residents. Louise, thoughts on that? Because I know that's hard because sometimes you go in, you're traveling a long way and you go out to maybe a really small assisted living or board and care home or residential care community, as they're now called, and that's really challenging. So any additional feedback?
I mean, I think, you could look around and talk to the provider and see if any, if there's any red flags, but you need to come back, to talk to residents, or if they're in a work site or adult day setting where you can go and talk to them privately there, that could be another kind of part of your visit. But yeah, you'd need to add something to it.
Thank you. Okay. And feel free to jump in, Louise, if you see any other questions you want to address. Kind of along the similar vein, there were some questions about if we have a facility with no residents, but continue to go to that facility each quarter to verify, I guess, that there are no residents and verify the resident count, is that considered a visit? So I think that goes back to what Louise just mentioned, that there needs to be other activities related to that. So, and I apologize if this wasn't clear, so good question, and Louise, feel free to jump in, but two representatives, goes back to the scenario about two representatives attend a resident council meeting, and we mentioned that maybe one way to count this to make sure that it's not a duplication of counting too many visits would be maybe that one ombudsman counts that as their visit, a routine facility visit, and because they do some of those activities in addition to the resident council meeting, and then the other ombudsman would count that as attending the resident council meeting. So the question was, does that mean that the resident attending the resident council meeting won't count as a non-complaint related facility visit? And it doesn't necessarily mean that, because usually, again, when you go to a resident council meeting, you're not just attending that meeting, you're engaging with residents outside of that meeting, and you can count that as a facility visit. The reason we separated those two out was just to give an example of how states could count that. So we know that it's important for everyone to be able to count the work they're doing. And so the reason that was identified is to give an example of how each of those ombudsmen that both attended that resident council meeting would be able to count that as work that they did. So I hope that makes sense. Good question. And Hillary, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to share your name. I was just going to say the question came in about directing the attendees to the document where it says if you don't talk or engage or observe residents, it doesn't count as a visit. Again, kind of like what Louise mentioned earlier when questions came in about maybe creating a checklist about what defines a routine visit. There isn't a current ACL or NORC document that defines to that level of what it counts, what counts for a routine visit. But I was just trying to provide additional clarification of what access to the Ombudsman program could mean whenever you are out in the field. So I do think that that's a great question about a checklist or some additional guidance or maybe a frequently asked question about that. So that is certainly on our to-do list to talk about with NASOP and NALCO and then amongst ourselves about what that would look like. But as Louise mentioned, a lot of states already have clarified what a routine visit means for their program, whether they set a minimum number of residents that need to be contacted, whether that means observed if they can't communicate, or actually spoken with if they can, and maybe even a minimum amount of time spent in the facility in order to count it as a routine visit. And states have created those definitions in order to ensure that representatives aren't doing kind of a wave therapy visit when they just, pop their head in, wave at a few people and move along. So some states have already created that structure, and that is something that we'll look at for additional guidance and technical supports to programs. So great question. Okay.
So,
any other, go ahead while I'm looking at questions.
So I see one about, let me see if I'm reading this correctly. So can one ombudsman have a routine visit and then you also talk with the resident about a complaint? Is this a complaint visit and a routine visit in the same day at the same facility? Your primary purpose sounds like it was a routine visit. So that would be one visit and it's a routine visit. So then there's another question, not about visits, but about resident councils. And it says, do you have to be a guest speaker at a resident council meeting in order to record your attendance at this meeting? I think the main thing is you have to be invited by the resident council, whether it's just to listen or whether you're a guest speaker. It's that your attendance and presence and being a resource. So you don't have to specifically be the guest speaker. And that's no different than it is now with NORS.
Thanks, Louise. Good questions. So, okay. So, again, going back to that question about visiting a facility that doesn't have residents. And as I mentioned earlier, I understand that a lot of these areas are really rural areas and it takes a lot of travel time to and from the facility. But you could still count that as activities if you at least provide information and assistance. But technically, it's not access to the Ombudsman program by residents. Louise, I'm not sure if you saw the question about training and technical assistance. Is that still counted as an activity, such as the monitoring laws and other aspects? I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that. I know that a lot of that's going to be the future state ombudsman specific training, but wanted to see if you want to answer that.
Yeah, so basically, we don't really have a good way in our current NORS to measure kind of the technical assistance and the monitoring laws, et cetera. So we've removed that from the current or from the new NORS. And so basically what we have done is we have added a lot more kind of detail to the state ombudsman part of the narrative that they have to write. And so that is going to help us get more specific information on strategies that the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman uses with regards to monitoring laws, regulations, et cetera. And then there's also another section for them to answer around the program's activity in terms of statewide coordination that the program does, including any local ombudsman, whether it's a local entity or a local staff representative of the office, if they are involved in any coalitions, work groups, et cetera, kind of there'll be a checklist that state ombudsmen can respond to around that. We know if you have volunteers or if you have staff that you are spending time providing training and technical assistance, and our attempts to get an estimate, it doesn't lead us to have concrete information. And what we've done instead is we are in the midst of a program evaluation, and the program evaluation gives us a lot more concrete information on the practices of state ombudsmen and local ombudsman entities and volunteers, and also the types of activities that they do, whether it's around systems advocacy or training and technical assistance and support of volunteers. So we're getting that information in a way that's more helpful. And on that vein, somebody also asked if how we would count this webinar today and the others in NORS. So in the new NORS, effective October 1st, this would not count for NORS. In the current NORS, it would be one session, and if 25 people in your state took it, there'd be 25 attendees, and it would be 1.5 hours. But it gets very complicated, which is why we've done away with that type of training information that we were gathering. So what we really want to understand is what's the state's minimum requirement for certification training, and what's the minimum requirement for continuing education. And from that, we can get a sense of, okay, if there's X number of staff or X number of volunteers and the continuing education is 12 hours, we can get a basic sense of what is the total hours of your training. But again, we want to get a better understanding of what's your baseline in your state. So that's why we have changed that approach, and it just simplifies the confusion that we currently have around trying to report training in NORS.
Thanks, Louise. So I would like to go back to the slides. Katie, could you go to the slide after the question slide? And as you're doing that, there was a question that came in about how is your program going to document your time on these webinars. And again, it's state specific. Up to your state, perhaps they'll count it as continuing education or something like that. But just to let you all know, we have a list of attendees, and we are sharing that with state ombudsmen. So hopefully that will help get some credit for attending. So thank you for attending. So thanks. I'm going to go back to the slides real quick and close out and just remind you of some resources we have available. So it sounds like for the most part, especially based on the responses to the quiz questions, that most everyone did their homework. So thank you so much, and that you probably have seen this table already, but this is the NORS Table 3, specifically a screenshot of the Part H. So again, please refer to that section, specifically codes S51 through S68, and the materials we discussed today when working through how to code these program activities. Next slide. Today, as you know, we've reviewed the Part 4 training materials, the basic principles, and the quiz answers. And of course, we referred to a lot of the examples and tips from the ACL table number 3. I do want to reiterate, like Louise said earlier, and we've mentioned in previous webinars, we are really taking very careful, close notes to the questions that you're asking, especially those that are in the gray area that need further clarification, and we are developing some frequently asked questions. And we do realize there's a lot of questions about, how to document visits to facilities. So we're in the process of that. You will be notified when those are available, and invited to register for the webinar that will provide some more in the weeds, detailed guidance on how to report those activities. So that will be forthcoming. And as Louise mentioned, we are working on an on-demand training course for NORS. So basically it will be the similar format and following the NORS training materials, the 4 parts, but it'll just be an on-demand course that folks can take either initially or as a refresher, and they'll have quiz questions, and so whoever their supervisor is will be able to see their answers, and there'll be I believe, a certificate of completion as well. And so we're very excited about having the funds, additional funds from ACL to be able to provide that to you all. So we are getting to work on that quickly, and hopefully we'll have that out soon. So again, this really is the first part in introducing you all to these training materials, and there's going to be a lot of ongoing, both individual, in-depth technical assistance to state ombudsmen, but technical assistance as we receive feedback and questions from you all in the field. So don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions. Next slide, please. And the next slide, sorry. But here, just as a reminder, this is the landing page on the NORC website with the current NORS training data, FAQs, and instructions and complaint codes. And then the last bullet is what you click on to get to the revised NORS data collection information. So next slide. And this page is where you'll find all of the training materials that we've reviewed in the webinar series, as well as the webinar recordings. And eventually that will be where the FAQs will be. So there's also the crosswalk tables that ACL created that'll give you a better idea of, the current codes and then what they crosswalk into and the revised codes. So please become really familiar with this page as you get acquainted with the revised NORS and you start training your representatives. Next slide. And as a friendly reminder, I know we've said this a lot, but just please remember that the revised NORS codes, definitions, and activities will be effective as of October 1st, 2019. So don't start using the new codes or definitions that we've been training on until then. The Office of the State Ombudsman will submit a federal fiscal year report with 2020 data in January 2021. So again, a lot of the components of the revised NORS are specific to the State Ombudsman Office. So refer back to this webinar series for information about how to report the work that you do in the field. Next slide. And here's our contact information. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Next slide. And there is our website as well as the Facebook and Twitter links. And I forgot to include, we do have a new NORC app. So please, if you haven't seen that already, please download that app. The app will also have information or a link directly to NORS. So obviously the link takes you directly to the current NORS information, but as of October 1, the app will take you to the revised NORS information. So it'll be a quick way to reference information that you need while you're in the field. So with that, thank you, Louise, so much for your presentation and for responding to all those questions. Thank you, Maria, for your presentation and participating in this entire webinar series. And thank you all for joining us today and for the important questions that you asked. There will be a brief evaluation at the end of this webinar, so please provide your feedback. And Louise, did you want to say something, or someone that unmuted?
Oh, I'm just to say thank you, everybody, and thank you, Amity and the NORC staff and Maria for pulling this all together. And, I realize there's some gray areas around visits. I think the main thing is we want to make sure one way or another they get recorded and counted. And so we will, again, follow further up, provide further follow-up in the coming months.
Yes. Thank you, Louise. Happy to do this. And again, thank you all for being here and walking through this with us. We know that it's a lot of new information and it's going to take some time to get used to it. So, let us know how it's going and just keep us posted. So that's all we have today. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.